Texts in the City brings classic texts to life for students, teachers and lifelong learners. In this episode, we'll turn our attention to Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte.
I want to talk a little bit about Emily Bronte because I think she was certainly the most eccentric of the Bronte sisters, which is saying something. And I've got this little quote that her sister Charlotte wrote about her just after she died, which is this. "My sister's disposition was not naturally gregarious. Circumstances favoured and fostered her tendency to seclusion. Except to go to church or to take a walk on the hills, she rarely crossed the threshold of home. Though her feeling for the people round was benevolent, intercourse with them she never sought, nor, with very few exceptions, ever experienced." And I read somewhere that pretty much her only companion other than her family was her dog, which was quite aggressive and weird, and that she liked to wear a purple dress that she had embroidered lightning bolts on.
Oh, did she?
Which I think is just the most awesome image. You said before backstage that Emily is your favourite of the Brontes.
Yeah. I think it's because there's something, as I said, I first loved her poetry, which is kind of purely passionate and very musical, and I responded very strongly to her work in that way. And then reading Wuthering Heights, compared to the other, I mean, I love all the Brontes, but compared to them, it's such a lawless book that allows these kind of anarchic energies into the narrative, and they are energies without inhibition, without kind of social control, and they're dangerous energies, and it's that kind of presence in the middle of something that is actually really repressive, and I think that was really interests me in her.
The book sort of centres very much, or in every way really, around this incredibly intense relationship between Cathy and Heathcliff. How would you describe that relationship?
How would I describe it? It's a famous relationship for all the wrong reasons, I think, that Cathy and Heathcliff has been taken in popular culture, in film, in adaptations, to be like the kind of obsessive, passionate love. And when you read the book, what you discover is that it's Cathy and Heathcliff are both almost entirely selfish people, and they're obsessed with each other. I think it's a beautiful portrait of an obsession that is not about each of them actually loving or caring for each other, but I think at one point Cathy says it's a necessity, that Heathcliff is a necessity to her, like the ground beneath her feet, and so it's a much kind of more elemental and deeper and troubling kind of thing that then, and it's cruel. I think this is a very cruel book, Wuthering Heights. There are passages in there that are some of the cruelest that are ever written in literature, I think, and the relationship between Cathy and Heathcliff is of that nature. It's not meant to be romantic.
Do you think Emily Bronte is scared of romance in her novel?
God, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is a good question. I mean, it's really hard to say anything about a writer from their writing, because you have to remember that writers are liars and make things up. So it's really dodgy to assume anything. But certainly she was a very private person, and I think certainly from what her sisters wrote about her, she was someone who loved very deeply and loyally and passionately, but romance was probably something she didn't encounter and perhaps didn't believe in. Perhaps she'd seen too much destruction.
So let's talk about Heathcliff. He's often been described as a Byronic hero. He's dark and he's brooding and he's mysterious and he's given to fits of rage and he's sort of handsome in a very kind of, dark sort of way. But lots of people seem to see him as this incredibly sexy romantic figure. What do you reckon?
Well, I suppose the first thing you have to acknowledge is there is something incredibly attractive about the bad boy. And, and in popular kind of culture, the bad boy, from Marlon Brando, Heathcliff, all these people are really sexy. And it occurs in the book. It occurs in the book as well, except that when Emily Bronte writes Heathcliff, she describes someone who is totally cruel to everybody except Cathy. And the thing about Heathcliff is he's a foundling. He's picked up by I can't remember his name.
Earnshaw.
Earnshaw, who adopts him, and it's generally assumed he's a gypsy. He's he's a street kid. And then he's treated with enormous cruelty, and you also think that he's been treated with enormous cruelty. So he's coming out. This isn't explicit in the book, but it's very implicit that he's coming from this background where he has been treated with great cruelty, and then in the book he's treated with great cruelty, especially by Hindley, and where there's some horrible descriptions of brutality against Heathcliff as well as others. And so what you see is someone who is so brutalised that the only person he's prepared to cut any slack for, and he worships, is Cathy.
And even then he's still pretty awful to her as well at times.
Yes, but they kind of accept that. That's part of the deal between them, because it seems to me at the same time fairly equal between those two.
Heathcliff goes away for a large part of the novel and returns without much explanation as to what he's been doing. What do you think he did during that time?
Well, she never tells you. He got rich. So he's seeing as Cathy's rejected him for being a primitive boy and not like Edgar, he's run off and become civilised and become rich. There's no point at which we ever learn, do we, really?
No, other than there is that moment where they ask somebody, isn't there a moment where somebody asks him, how did you get it? And he said the way that everybody does, by taking advantage of other men.
Yeah, so it's a bit dubious. But
yeah, I'm sure it wasn't by honourable means.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't, I just can't imagine him, starting up a small business or something. Doesn't strike me as really in Heathcliff's thing. I want to talk about the reader, and I want to sort of talk about the early readers of this book, and I've got a couple of quotes from contemporary reviews.
Oh, yes, they're good.
They are good. The first one is from the Atlas, who said, "We know nothing in the whole range of our fictitious literature which presents such shocking pictures of the worst forms of humanity. There is not in the entire dramatis persona a single character who is not utterly hateful or thoroughly contemptible. Even the female characters excite something of loathing and much of contempt. Beautiful and lovable in their childhood, they all, to use a vulgar expression, turn out badly." What is it about this book that was so shocking at the time and is still shocking today?
Gosh, I think at the time it was... I mean, there is this really... It's a funny book because there are ways in which, like when you read it and you think it's not that well written. If you read it, you can see that all the characters, even those with, Yorkshire accents, kind of sound like the same character too. There's these ways in which it shouldn't be successful as a book. It shouldn't work, except it does. It has this kind of compelling power that's, quite incredible. But it's... And the crudeness and the strangeness of it is part of that power, strangely. I think with a book like Wuthering Heights, it shows really clearly that great writing isn't about being perfect. Yeah. It's about something that goes on in all the flaws and imperfections of the book that then creates something that's quite unforgettable. Yep. And that captures the imagination. So because it's like that, and it's quite sui generis, I don't think there's another book like it. It would have been a really foreign object. I think the thing about Wuthering Heights is people keep trying to domesticate it and make it less strange, less cruel, less odd, and more perfect, if you like, than it actually is. But it keeps remaining being there, full of flaws, full of, exactly what it is, and challenging all those attempts to domesticate it. It is a wild book.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and kind of goes a lot of the way to explain why people are sort of so intent on turning Cathy and Heathcliff's relationship into a romance instead of into something that was incredibly unhealthy and toxic. And that can't really be contained by any of our conventional ideas of love, which I think is very interesting.
Part of the reason it's so compelling is there's something true in it as well, and something that you recognise and that is necessary. So our ideas of love as healthy, it challenges those as well. Maybe love isn't. Maybe love isn't, like a projection of egocentricity and all those things that actually are the case. So it's constantly sort of prickling you to, reflect back on the things you assume, like all good books do, I think, which can be uncomfortable.
We talked about Jane Eyre here 2 weeks ago, and I think there is very much a case to be made that Jane Eyre is a feminist novel.
Oh, yeah.
Can we make the same argument about Wuthering Heights?
I don't know whether you call it feminist, though it has these very vivid, strong female characters. I think you get the sense that socially women have a place, but you don't get the sense that actually they're inferior, or it reinforces those things, and there is a pushing against those kinds of roles and limitations. So I don't think that's what's important about it, really.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm interested at the kind of the role that religion plays in the book, and there's that sort of incredibly intense kind of moment where Cathy talk about her dream, and she says, heaven did not seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth, and the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on the top of Wuthering Heights, where I woke sobbing for joy. What do you think and then there's also the character of Joseph, who is, sort of a horrendously, terrifyingly religious person, and if Bronte is casting any kind of judgment on any character, it's on him.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So what do you think the role of religion is?
I think in Wuthering Heights it's present as... It is a nightmarish thing. I mean, it's the nightmare that Mr. Lockwood has right at the beginning about the endless kind of lecture and so on. It's. I think it becomes the place where all the limitations, all the things that repress people are most present, but it also gives Emily Bronte these fantastic kind of polarizations between heaven and hell. Eternal suffering, eternal delight, which both of them mix in Cathy and Heathcliff, if you like. They're both all at once.
It is very much a gothic novel. There are pretentious dreams and visions and bleak, lonely castles and storms and moors and things. I certainly noticed the sort of the frequency of keys and locks. Oh, okay. And that sense of, and windows also, and that's the whole idea of like opening and closing and excluding and including, which I think is sort of very, very central, the idea of the people who are invited in and the people who are not. And apart from all of the kind of the social stuff about Heathcliff being excluded from society, I think there's also this sense that Heathcliff and Cathy's relationship is so intense that nobody else is invited into into that, and that nobody else can ever dream to succeed to something as big and emotional and pure. I want to talk about Thrushcross Grange, which is incredibly difficult to say out loud.
It is hard to say.
It is seen, and the people who live there are seen as sort of being very calm, but also very kind of weak and insipid and ineffectual, and very conventional. And Wuthering Heights is wild and savage and elemental. And I do like it when Isabella and Edward are described as milk-blooded cowards. To what extent do you think Wuthering Heights is condemning kind of social norms and niceties?
Like I said, I think Bronte doesn't judge anybody. She's kind of, and that's one of the great strengths in the book, that she's as the writer, just through the different eyes of her narrators, offering you this picture of all these different characters. and they are unreliable, all of them. I don't think she's drawing any morals at all. There's the moral of the book in terms of the whole kind of generational tidying up that happens at the end, which I've never been quite sure about, and it kind of finishes with this, very beautiful, peaceful image of the characters slumbering in the quiet earth, etc. And there's all of that, but as if all that stuff has been tamed, but at the same time, well, for me, there's the sense that it hasn't. It's still present there.
I always read the 3 tombstones and that incredibly peaceful scene, and like there's a lot of life in it. There's the wind kind of breathing through the grass, and everything's all nice and sort of so different to all of the storms and the rock and the horror of before. But I always sort of saw that as a kind of like a return to nature, that now they've sort of been absorbed into nature, and that nature is such an important part, and the sort of the idea of the land and the moors and the heath and everything is so important.
Absolutely.
And that now that they have that they've always kind of been trying to wrestle to be civilized and ignore the kind of the pull of nature, and that now that they're kind of in the ground, they've sort of become part of nature, and so they can just calm down a little bit because they're not being pulled away from it anymore.
Mr. Lockwood is probably as dubious as anybody else.
Yeah, and incredibly.
But he believes he's civilised.
Yeah.
And so you understand that within Mr. Lockwood is this capacity for extreme cruelty, and which he won't acknowledge.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's part of the ambiguity of the book.
In the ending, we achieve this balance between the sort of the milk cowards of Thrushcross Grange and the kind of the wild craziness of Wuthering Heights with Kathy and Hareton, and that their relationship seems a lot healthier. They have this sort of balance of being not completely restrained. They're friends, they laugh together, but she is exerting a civilising influence on him. She's teaching him how to read, but that they're certainly not as constrained as the previous generation of Lintons were, perhaps. Do you think it's a happy ending?
Oh, I think it's framed as a happy ending. And and it's certainly an idealised kind of image that you're left with of the possibility of civilization, and but it is a return to kind of order. Like, you get the sense with Wuthering Heights that it's an orderly farmhouse into which is brought Heathcliff, and from Heathcliff's presence, that's where things fall to bits because of the jealousy between Heathcliff and Earnshaw, and how the cruelties that brings out, and then what follows from that, which is all destruction. So there is this sense that order that was prior is now being restored. So perhaps there is this sense of a natural order, but it's a natural order in which things have been revealed by that presence, if you like.
As an author, what do you reckon about the dual narrator technique that Emily Bronte uses during her novel Wuthering Heights?
It's not even dual, really. There's even more than that. There's like six of them, really.
I really like it. Because there's two narrators. If there was one narrator, you would accept that as the truth. Because there's two narrators, you suddenly have two ideas of truth that call each other into question, and I think I like that a lot. And that's what I used in my own book, because I liked it. And there's actually 3 voices in my book that are all completely different for that reason, that, here's this truth, here's this other truth, and here's another one. If you're just baldly narrating something, that's one way of talking about something. But if you have a character who has an opinion about everything, it gives you more kind of...
gives you something to push against.
Yeah, more kind of play, because you can write things that then the reader is invited to doubt or to differ with, or that's inconsistent with that, whatever I heard earlier. But and I think Nellie's actually a fantastic character in the book, and what you have is a totally consistent character through which you make your own judgments. I think that you begin to know who she is, and so you begin to see how she judges things, how she tells circumstance, and read through that.
Yeah.
Do you think that Wuthering Heights shows that darkness is an inherent part of human nature?
Sounds like an excellent question.
Yeah. There's a writer called Georges Bataille who is a French philosopher who formed a club during World War II in which everybody who joined had to kill themselves. Nobody joined, strangely. But he wrote a book called Literature and Evil, and one of the writers he talked about was Emily Brontë, because he said that he took Brontë as one of the people who looked at the extremities, which is why she's so interesting. She looked at the extremities of what it means to be a human being, and those extremities are the things that we often don't acknowledge about ourselves, but they are within us.